The river wasn't just water that morning. It was a freezing grave waiting to claim a life. Sarah Bennett stood on the muddy bank of the Yellowstone, staring at a bundle of driftwoods bobbing violently in the current. Then she heard it. Not the wind, but a scream. A human scream. Without thinking, she plunged into the ice-cold rapids, unaware that the child she was about to pull from the water would bring a war to her doorstep. She didn't just save a boy. She saved the heir to a kingdom, and his father was riding down from the hills with an offer that would shake the entire frontier. The Montana Territory, in the spring of 1887, was a place where silence was heavy enough to crush a person. For Sarah Bennett, the silence was a companion she had grown used to, though she never quite learned to like it. Her cabin sat 3 miles outside the settlement of Oak Creek, isolated by a dense thicket of pine and the roaring curve of the Yellowstone River. Sarah was 29, with hands calloused from chopping her own wood and eyes that had seen too much loss for one lifetime. Her husband, Arthur, had died 2 winters ago, not from a bullet or a bear, but from a fever that burned him up in 3 days, leaving Sarah with 40 acres of rocky soil, a mule named Buster, and a debt to the town's wealthiest landowner, Coulter Ricks. It was a Tuesday morning, the air biting with the last frost of the season, when Sarah went down to the river to scrub the heavy wool blankets. The water was high, swollen with snowmelt from the distant peaks. The sound of the river was usually a roar, a constant white noise that drowned out thought. But as Sarah knelt on the flat stones, plunging her hands into the numbing gray water, a sound cut through the din. It was sharp, high-pitched. Sarah froze, water dripping from her red elbows. She scanned the tree line on the opposite bank. Nothing but swaying pines and the dark shadows of the forest. Bears were common this time of year, hungry and irritable, but this sound wasn't animal. Wah! She dropped the wet blanket. It was a cry. She stood up, shielding her eyes against the pale morning sun. "Hello!" she called out, her voice snatched away by the wind. Then she saw it. About 50 yards upstream, a tangled mass of branches and debris, a snag, was spinning in the violent current. Caught in the center of the dead wood was a basket. It wasn't a woven picnic basket. It was made of tightly bound reeds and buffalo hide, waterproofed with pine pitch. A hand, small and brown, shot up from the basket, grasping at the air. "Oh, dear God," Sarah gasped. The current was dragging the snag toward the jagged rocks at the bend known as Dead Man's Curve. If the basket hit those rocks, it would be shattered instantly. Sarah didn't think about the cold. She didn't think about the fact that she was wearing a heavy wool dress and sturdy leather boots that would weigh her down like lead. She didn't think about Arthur, or the debt, or the loneliness. She simply ran. She sprinted along the muddy bank, her boots slipping on slick stones. She had to get ahead of the current. The basket was picking up speed, spinning wildly as the water turned white and frothy. "Hold on!" she screamed, though she knew the child couldn't hear her. She reached a spot where an old willow tree leaned precariously over the water. Without hesitation, Sarah grabbed a low-hanging branch and swung herself out. The water swirled 3 feet below her boots. The snag was coming fast. She had one chance. As the debris rushed under the willow, Sarah let go of the branch with one hand, dangling by her left arm, her muscles screaming. She extended her right hand, fingers spread wide. The basket rushed by. She missed the rim, but her fingers caught the tough leather strap bound around the side. The force of the river nearly ripped her arm from its socket. She groaned, gritting her teeth, her feet kicking uselessly in the freezing spray. "Come on," she hissed, pulling with every ounce of strength she possessed. The basket was heavy, waterlogged, and carrying the weight of a child. The branch above her creaked ominously. Sarah swung her legs, hooking them around the trunk of the willow, finding purchase on the rough bark. With a leverage point established, she hauled the basket upward, clutching it to her chest with a desperate grip. She scrambled back along the trunk, gasping for air, shivering violently as the adrenaline began to fade and the cold took over. She collapsed onto the muddy bank, the basket safe in her lap. She tore open the leather cover. Inside, wrapped in soft furs that were dry despite the river's fury, was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 2 years old. He had a shock of black hair and skin the color of polished copper. His eyes were wide, dark, and terrified. He had stopped crying the moment the motion stopped, and now he just stared at her, his small chest heaving. Sarah recognized the beadwork on the furs immediately. It was intricate, beautiful, and distinctly tribal. "You're Crow," she whispered, her breath clouding in the air. Or perhaps Sioux. She wasn't an expert on the tribes that moved through the valley, but she knew enough to know that in Oak Creek, this child was considered an enemy by the men who sat in the saloon and complained about savages. The boy reached out a chubby hand and touched Sarah's wet cheek. Sarah's heart broke and swelled all at once. She looked around. The river was empty. The opposite bank was silent. How had he ended up in the water? A failed crossing? An attack? She looked at the boy's neck. There was a necklace made of silver and a single, large bear claw. It looked heavy, ancient, and important. "You aren't just anyone, are you?" she murmured. She wrapped the furs tighter around him, pulled him to her chest, and stood up. She had to get him warm. But more importantly, she had to hide him. If Coulter Ricks or the sheriff saw her with a native child, they wouldn't ask questions. They would just act, and it wouldn't be with kindness. The fire in the hearth cracked and popped, sending waves of heat through the small cabin. Sarah had stripped the boy of the furs and wrapped him in one of Arthur's old flannel shirts. It swallowed him whole, making him look even smaller than he was. She sat him on the rug in front of the fire and heated up some goat's milk. He drank it greedily from a tin cup, his dark eyes following her every move. He was remarkably calm now, a quiet dignity about him that seemed beyond his years. "What is your name?" she asked softly, sitting in her rocking chair, her rifle propped nearby. The boy just blinked. "I'll call you Sam," she said. "For now." Sam finished the milk and let out a small, contented sigh. Sarah watched him, her mind racing. She couldn't keep him. His mother must be frantic, but she couldn't just walk into the reservation lands either. Tensions were at an all-time high. A settler crossing the boundary line was asking for an arrow in the chest, just as a native coming into Oak Creek was asking for a rope. She needed advice, but she had no one to trust. Suddenly, Buster the mule brayed loudly from the barn. Sarah stiffened. Buster only made noise when strangers were coming up the trail. She moved quickly. "Sam," she whispered, pointing to the space beneath her bed. It was obscured by a long quilt. "Hide. Quiet like a mouse. Understand?" The boy seemed to sense the urgency in her tone. He scrambled under the bed without a sound. Sarah adjusted the quilt, smoothed her damp hair, and grabbed the rifle. She wasn't going to open the door unarmed. She heard the heavy thud of hooves outside, followed by the creak of saddle leather. "Sarah, you in there, girl?" The voice made her stomach turn. It was Coulter Ricks. Sarah opened the door just wide enough to show the barrel of the Winchester. Coulter Ricks sat atop a massive black stallion, flanked by two of his ranch hands, men known for being quick with their fists and slow with their wits. Coulter was a handsome man in a cruel sort of way, with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his pale blue eyes. He owned half the valley and wanted the other half, including Sarah's 40 acres, which controlled the best water access on this side of the ridge. "Put the gun down, Sarah," Coulter said, tipping his hat. "Is that how you greet a neighbor?" "It is when the neighbor shows up uninvited," Sarah said, her voice steady. "What do you want, Coulter?" "I was just riding the fence line," Coulter lied. The fence line was 5 miles east. "Saw you down by the river earlier. You looked like you were wrestling a gator." "You fall in?" Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. He had been watching. "I slipped washing blankets. Lost one to the current." Coulter's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward on his saddle horn. "Is that so?" "My boys and we found something interesting upstream. A campsite. Looked like a scouting party. Natives." Sarah kept her face blank. "I haven't seen anyone." "Haven't you?" Coulter scanned the yard. "We found blood at the campsite, Sarah. A skirmish, maybe. Or internal fighting. Point is, if there are savages running loose, a pretty woman all alone out here isn't safe." "I have my rifle," Sarah said. "A rifle runs out of bullets," Coulter said smoothly. "Look, I'll make the offer again. Sell me the land. I'll give you a fair price. Enough to move back east, find a nice husband, live in the city. This land is too hard for you." "It's my home," Sarah said, "and it's not for sale." Coulter's smile vanished. The ranch hands shifted, their hands drifting toward their holsters. "Hard things happen to stubborn people, Sarah," Coulter said, his voice dropping an octave. "Barns catch fire. Livestock goes missing. Sometimes, people disappear." "Is that a threat, Mr. Ricks?" "It's a warning about the dangers of the frontier," he replied, pulling his horse's reins. "Keep your eyes open. If you see any redskins, you come to me. Don't try to be a hero. We handle them our way." He turned his horse and galloped off, his men following in a cloud of dust. Sarah watched them until they disappeared around the bend. She slammed the door and bolted it. Her hands were shaking now. Coulter wasn't just looking for land. He was hunting. And if he found Sam, he would use the boy. He might kill him to spite the tribe, or use him as a hostage to provoke a war that would clear the territory of natives once and for all, giving him access to all the land he wanted. She pulled the quilt up. Sam crawled out, clutching a wooden toy soldier that had been under the bed. "They are bad men," Sarah whispered to the boy, pulling him into a hug. "But I won't let them take you." That night, the wind howled like a grieving mother. Sarah didn't sleep. She sat by the window, rifle in her lap, watching the tree line. Around midnight, the howling of the wind changed. It was joined by the rhythmic thumping of drums, distant, deep, and terrifying. They were coming. Not the town, the tribe. They were looking for the child, and they were tracking the river. Sarah looked at Sam, sleeping peacefully in her bed. If the tribe found him here, they might think she kidnapped him. They might burn the cabin down before she could explain. But if she tried to run to town, Coulter Ricks would intercept her. She was trapped between a hammer and an anvil. Then the dogs started barking. Not her dogs. She didn't have any. These were the deep, throat-rumbling barks of war dogs. Torchlight flickered through the cracks in the window shutters. Sarah stood up. She had to make a choice. Hide and hope they passed, or walk out and face them. She looked at the boy. He had saved her from loneliness. She had to save him from death. She picked up the boy, wrapped him in the blanket, and unbolted the door. She left her rifle inside. She stepped out onto the porch. The yard was full of them. Dozens of warriors on painted horses, their faces marked with the clay of mourning and war. Spears and repeating rifles were aimed directly at her heart. In the center of them, on a white stallion that looked like a ghost in the darkness, sat a man. He was immense, his shoulders broad, wearing a war bonnet of eagle feathers that trailed down his back. His face was sharp, angular, and terrifyingly stoic. This was the chief, the leader. He raised a hand, and the warriors fell silent. The only sound was the crackle of the torches and the rush of the river. Sarah swallowed hard, her throat dry as dust. She stepped forward, holding the bundle out. "I believe," she said, her voice trembling but loud, "that this belongs to you." The chief stared at her. He didn't look at the child. He looked at her. And in his eyes, Sarah saw something she didn't expect. It wasn't hatred. It was calculation. He dismounted. He walked toward her, towering over her small frame. He stopped inches away. He smelled of sage, leather, and rain. He reached out, his large hand brushing Sarah's trembling arm as he pulled the blanket back to reveal the boy's face. Sam opened his eyes and looked at the giant man. "Ada," the boy chirped. "Father." The chief let out a breath that sounded like a shudder. He looked at Sarah. "You took him from the river?" he asked. His English was perfect, deep and resonant. "Yes," Sarah whispered. "The river takes what it wants," the chief said. "It does not give back, unless a spirit intervenes." He stepped back, looking her up and down. "My name is Blackwood," he said, "and you, woman of the river, have just complicated my life." "I just saved a boy," Sarah said. "No," Blackwood said, turning to his men who were lowering their weapons. "You saved the blood of the wolf. And for that, the law of the plains says a debt is owed." He turned back to her, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Prepare yourself, Sarah Bennett. Tomorrow, I return. Not for war, but to pay the debt." "How do you know my name?" Sarah asked, stunned. Blackwood mounted his horse. "I know everything that happens on my river." He wheeled the horse around. "Guard this house," he commanded his men. 4 warriors remained behind, planting their spears in her garden, while the rest rode off into the night. Sarah was left standing on the porch, the boy in her arms, 4 native warriors guarding her tulips, and the realization that she had just become the most important and dangerous woman in the territory. Morning broke over the valley with a deceptive calm. The mist clung to the Yellowstone River like a bruised spirit, gray and heavy. Inside the cabin, Sarah hadn't slept a wink. She sat in the rocking chair, the rifle across her lap, watching the chest of the sleeping boy, whom the chief had called the blood of the wolf. Outside, the world had changed. Her front yard, usually occupied only by scratching chickens and the mule, was now a fortress. The 4 warriors Blackwood had left behind stood like statues carved from mahogany and granite. They hadn't moved, hadn't eaten, and hadn't spoken. They simply watched the perimeter, their repeating rifles resting easily in the crooks of their arms. Sarah stood up, her joints popping, and moved to the stove to stoke the dying embers. She needed coffee. Strong, black coffee. As the aroma filled the small space, the boy, whose name she now knew was the son of Blackwood, stirred. He sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Ada?" he asked, looking around for his father. "He'll be back," Sarah said, her voice raspy. She handed him a piece of cornbread. "Eat." The piece shattered at 80 a.m. It started with the rumble of wheels and the shouting of men. Sarah rushed to the window. Coming down the muddy track from Oak Creek wasn't just Coulter Ricks this time. It was a mob. Leading them was Sheriff Tobias Miller, a man whose spine was as flexible as his morals. Behind him rode Coulter Ricks, looking smug, and behind them were at least 20 men from town, miners, drifters, and shopkeepers, all armed. They looked angry, fueled by rumors, and likely by the whiskey Ricks had been buying all morning. They pulled up short at the edge of Sarah's property line. The 4 native warriors didn't flinch. They simply raised their rifles in unison, the metallic clack-clack of lever actions chambering rounds echoing loudly in the silence. Sheriff Miller held up a hand, stopping the mob. "Sarah Bennett," the sheriff bellowed, cupping his hands around his mouth. "You come out here, girl. We're here to rescue you." Sarah grabbed her Winchester. She looked at the little boy. "Stay here. Do not move." She threw open the door and stepped onto the porch. The morning air was crisp. One of the native warriors, a scarred man with streaks of white paint in his hair, looked at her. He gave a barely perceptible nod. He knew she wasn't a hostage. "I don't need rescuing, Tobias," Sarah shouted back, standing tall. "Don't be daft, woman," Coulter Ricks yelled, pushing his horse forward. "You've got savages on your lawn. They've taken you hostage. We're here to clear them out and take you to safety." "They aren't holding me hostage," Sarah yelled, her voice ringing with a fury she didn't know she possessed. "They are guarding me from you." A murmur went through the crowd. This wasn't the story Ricks had told them. "She's suffering from Stockholm Syndrome," Ricks shouted to the men. "Or they've bewitched her. Look at them. Standing there on decent white-owned land. Sheriff, do your duty. Shoot them down." The sheriff hesitated. Shooting 4 armed Crow warriors was a good way to start a massacre, and everyone knew Blackwood's main force wasn't far. "Sarah," the sheriff tried again, his voice softer. "Just walk toward us. We can't leave you with them. It ain't Christian. And we heard rumors about a child, a native child." Sarah went cold. "Hand over the brat, Sarah," Ricks sneered. "That boy is a threat to this valley. He's the spawn of Blackwood. We take the boy. We have leverage. We can force Blackwood to sign the new treaty. Give up the land." "So that's it," Sarah said, realizing the depths of Ricks's depravity. "You don't want to save me. You want to use a baby as a bargaining chip." "It's politics, darling," Ricks spat. "Now move aside or we go through you." Ricks drew his revolver. The mob behind him raised their shotguns. The 4 warriors on the lawn tensed. The air crackled with violence. It was 4 against 20, a slaughter waiting to happen. "No!" Sarah screamed. She raised her Winchester, not at the warriors, but directly at Coulter Ricks. The crowd gasped. A white woman aiming a gun at the town's richest man, defending natives. It was unheard of. "The first man who crosses that fence line gets a bullet in the gut," Sarah promised, her hands shaking but her aim true. "This is my land, and these men are my guests." "You're a traitor, Sarah," Ricks growled, his face turning red. "You're siding with the enemy against your own blood." "My own blood left me to starve when Arthur died," Sarah shot back. "My own blood tries to steal my land every week. These men, they haven't asked for a thing." Ricks cocked the hammer of his pistol. "Fine. If you want to die with them, That can be arranged. He raised the gun. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. It started as a low vibration in the soles of their boots, then grew to a rhythmic thunder. The men in the mob looked around, confused. From the ridge behind the cabin, a silhouette appeared. Then another. Then 50. Chief Blackwood had returned, and he hadn't come alone. Hundreds of warriors crested the hill, lining the ridge like a forest of spears. They sat silently on their horses, silhouetted against the rising sun. The sheer number of them was breathtaking. Coulter Ricks's horse whinnied in terror and stepped back. The mob of townsfolk lowered their guns, their faces draining of color. This wasn't a skirmish. It was an army. Blackwood rode down the slope alone, his white stallion picking its way carefully through the rocks. He rode past Sarah, past the guards, and stopped 10 feet from Coulter Ricks. The chief didn't draw a weapon. He simply stared at Ricks with eyes that looked like black glass. "You wish to take my son?" Blackwood asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the clearing. Ricks swallowed hard, his bravado melting away. We were just checking on Mrs. Bennett, ensuring her safety." "She is safe," Blackwood said. "Safe from you." He turned his gaze to the sheriff. "Take your men and leave this place. If one boot touches this soil again, I will burn Oak Creek to the ground. This is not a threat, Sheriff Miller. It is a prophecy." The sheriff nodded frantically. All right, we're going. Ricks, put the gun away. We're leaving." Ricks glared at Sarah, his eyes filled with pure, venomous hate. "This isn't over, Sarah. You've made your bed. Now you have to lie in it." He wheeled his horse around and galloped away. The mob followed, retreating in a cloud of dust and shame. Sarah lowered her rifle, her knees buckling. She sat down hard on the porch steps, trembling. Blackwood dismounted. He walked over to her, his shadow falling over her shaking form. "You stood for my men," he said, sounding surprised. "You raised a weapon against your own chief." "He's not my chief," Sarah whispered. "He's a landlord." Blackwood nodded slowly. "You have the spirit of a bear, Sarah Bennett. But you have made a powerful enemy today. You can no longer live as you did." "I know," she said, tears stinging her eyes. "I'm an outcast now." "No," Blackwood said, extending a hand to help her up. "You are not an outcast. You are something else." The inside of the cabin felt too small for Blackwood. He seemed to take up all the air in the room. He sat at Sarah's kitchen table, which creaked under the weight of his arms. His son, little Dakota, was sitting on his lap, playing with the fringe of his father's buckskin shirt. Outside, the army waited. Inside, it was a negotiation. Sarah poured Blackwood coffee. He looked at the black liquid suspiciously, then took a sip. He didn't wince. "Why was he in the river?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence. "A child doesn't just fall into the Yellowstone in a basket." Blackwood's expression darkened. A muscle in his jaw jumped. "It was not an accident," he said, his voice low. "It was a betrayal. We have a sickness in the tribe, a man named Red Dog. He believes the old ways are dead. He believes we should sell the land to Ricks and live on the government rations." Sarah gasped. "Ricks?" "Yes. Coulter Ricks has been meeting with Red Dog in secret. Ricks promised Red Dog power if he removed the obstacle to the treaty." "The obstacle?" "Me," Blackwood said. "And my line. If my son is dead, and I am grieving, Red Dog argued that the tribe would look to a new leader, a leader willing to sign Ricks's papers. So they stole him," Sarah realized, horror washing over her. and threw him in the river like trash. They wanted no body found, Blackwood explained. They wanted me to believe he was taken by spirits or wolves. They did not account for the currents, and they did not account for you. He looked at Sarah. The intensity of his gaze made her blush. You saved the future of my people, Sarah. That creates a bond that cannot be broken by simple thanks. You don't owe me anything, Sarah said. Anyone would have done it. No, Blackwood corrected. Ricks would have drowned him. Miller would have sold him. You saved him. And now, because of what happened this morning, your life is forfeit. What do you mean? Ricks cannot let you live, Blackwood stated matter-of-factly. You humiliated him. You hold the truth of his alliance with Red Dog. And you are now seen as a sympathizer? If I leave, his men will return tonight. They will burn this cabin with you inside. They will say it was an accident. Or they will blame it on us. Sarah knew he was right. She had seen the look in Coulter's eyes. She was a loose end. So what do I do? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Do I run? I have no money to go east. No, Blackwood said. He stood up, placing the sleeping boy gently on Sarah's bed. He turned to face her. There is a law among my people. When two bloodlines are mixed by a life debt, they become one. He took a step closer. I cannot leave soldiers here forever. It would be an act of war, and you cannot live in the town. So, you must come with me. Go with you? To the encampment? Sarah asked. They won't accept me. I'm white. I'm the enemy. They will accept you, Blackwood said firmly, if you are my wife. The silence that followed was deafening. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly. Your wife? Sarah stammered. You're proposing marriage? I am proposing survival, Blackwood said. He wasn't romantic. He was strategic. If you are my wife, you are under the protection of the Great Spirit and the Council. No man, red or white, can touch you without declaring war on the entire Crow Nation. You will have a home. You will have food. You will be a mother to the boy you saved, who already looks at you with love. Sarah stared at him. He was handsome, undeniably. There was a nobility to him that the men in town lacked. But to leave everything, to become a squaw in the eyes of her people? And if I say no, then I will leave you 4 horses and enough gold to reach the coast, Blackwood said. But I cannot promise you will make it past the county line. Ricks has long arms. Sarah looked around her cabin. It was lonely. It was full of ghosts of a dead husband and a hard life. She looked at the little boy sleeping on the bed. She looked at Blackwood, a man who was offering her the one thing she hadn't had in years, safety. This isn't a love match, Sarah said quietly. Love is a luxury for times of peace, Blackwood replied. We are at war, Sarah. I offer you respect, honor, and protection. Can that be enough? Sarah walked to the window. She saw the dust settling on the road where Ricks had fled. She saw the warriors waiting for their chief. She turned back to him. I have conditions, she said. Blackwood raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement crossing his stoic face. I would expect nothing less. I keep my mule, Buster, she said. The mule comes. I keep my religion. I won't pray to your spirits, and you won't pray to mine. The spirits listen to all tongues. Agreed. And, Sarah stepped closer, looking up into his dark eyes, I am not a trophy. I am a partner. If I come with you, I have a voice. I won't sit in a tent and bead moccasins while you decide my fate. Blackwood stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he smiled. It changed his whole face, making him look younger, less burdened. A woman who faces down a mob with a rifle does not sit in the back of the tent, he said. You will stand by my side. He held out his hand. It was large, scarred, and warm. So, Sarah Bennett, will you ride with us? Sarah took a deep breath. She thought of the freezing river, the crying child, and the empty life she had been living. She reached out and took his hand. I'll get my coat, she said. The departure was a spectacle that would be talked about in the Montana Territory for 100 years. Sarah Bennett, the widow of Oak Creek, locked the door to her cabin. She mounted her mule, Buster, her Winchester, in the scabbard. Chief Blackwood lifted his son onto his stallion, then mounted behind him. He signaled to his men. As they rode away, Sarah didn't look back at the cabin. She looked forward, toward the jagged peaks of the Absaroka Range and the smoke of the fires rising in the distance. She was riding into a world she didn't understand, to marry a man she barely knew, to raise a child that wasn't hers. But as she glanced at Blackwood, riding tall and proud beside her, she felt a strange sensation in her chest. It wasn't fear. It was the thrill of being alive. However, Sarah didn't know that the hardest part wasn't leaving. The hardest part would be arriving. The tribe was not a monolith. There were factions. And while Blackwood was the chief, Red Dog was still there, watching, waiting. And Red Dog didn't just hate white settlers. He hated the woman who had ruined his plan. As the procession entered the deep woods, a scout watched from a high ridge, lowering his spyglass. He turned his horse and rode hard toward the south, toward a secret meeting place where Coulter Ricks was waiting. The war hadn't been averted. It had just changed battlegrounds. The Crow encampment, nestled in a wide, grassy valley protected by high bluffs, was a vibrant explosion of life and color. Hundreds of teepees, painted with geometric designs and animal figures, dotted the landscape. Smoke curled lazily from cooking fires, and the sounds of laughter, barking dogs, and distant drumming filled the air. For Sarah, riding Buster into the heart of it all, it was a dizzying assault on her senses. Children, their faces bright and curious, stopped their games to stare. Women paused in their work, their eyes wide with surprise and suspicion. Warriors, grim-faced and watchful, kept their hands close to their knives. Sarah felt every single gaze, hot and cold, upon her. She was an alien, a ghost in a foreign land. Dakota, Blackwood's son, sat happily in front of his father, occasionally turning to wave at Sarah, his small gesture a lifeline in the sea of unfamiliarity. Blackwood, for his part, rode with the stoic bearing of a king. He didn't introduce her, he simply led her. His presence was her shield. They stopped at the largest teepee, adorned with the painted figures of a charging wolf and an eagle in flight. This was Blackwood's home, and now it would be hers. Woman of the river, Blackwood announced, dismounting and helping Dakota down. This is our home. You will be safe here. A woman, older than Sarah, with lines of wisdom etched around her eyes and a regal air, stepped out of the teepee. She wore an elaborately beaded dress, and her silver hair was braided with strips of red cloth. This was Grandmother Willow, Blackwood's mother, and the spiritual matriarch of the tribe. Her gaze, unlike the others, was not hostile, but piercing, as if seeing straight into Sarah's soul. Blackwood spoke to her in their language, rapid and guttural, explaining Sarah's role in Dakota's rescue and the decision to take her as his wife. Grandmother Willow listened, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she looked at Sarah. Her eyes softened slightly. She reached out a hand, not to shake it, but to touch Sarah's cheek. Her touch was surprisingly warm. "You saved my grandson," Grandmother Willow said in heavily accented English. "You bring honor to the Wolf clan." It was not a welcome, but an acknowledgement of a debt. Sarah understood the distinction. The wedding ceremony was not what Sarah expected. There were no hymns, no white dress. It was held at sundown, around a roaring bonfire in the center of the encampment. The entire tribe was present, a sea of faces illuminated by the flickering flames. Sarah wore a simple buckskin dress that had been given to her, softer than any fabric she had ever worn, though the leather smell was strong. Blackwood stood beside her, his face painted with symbols of strength and union. Dakota sat between them, holding a small eagle feather. The ceremony was led by Grandmother Willow, her voice a chant that wove through the smoke and the thrumming of drums. She spoke of the river, of the spirit of the wolf, and of the joining of two paths. Sarah didn't understand most of the words, but she understood the gestures. The sharing of pemmican, the exchange of a single, small silver ring from Blackwood, and a small carved wooden bird from Sarah. The tying of their hands together with a strip of buffalo hide, symbolizing their unbreakable bond. When it was done, Blackwood turned to her. He didn't kiss her. He simply looked at her, his dark eyes solemn. "You are my wife now, Sarah," he said, his voice deep and clear. "You are one of us. My people will watch over you, as will I." Then the celebration began. Food was shared, drums were beaten, and singing filled the night. Sarah, exhausted and overwhelmed, found herself seated next to Grandmother Willow, who quietly shared stories of the tribe, subtly teaching Sarah about their customs and their history. But as the night wore on, Sarah felt eyes on her, not the curious gazes of the children or the wary stares of the women. This was a different kind of gaze, cold and calculating. She scanned the crowd and saw him, Red Dog. He was a lean, hard man, his face a mask of resentment. He sat on the periphery, surrounded by a small group of warriors who watched him with deference. When his eyes met Sarah's, a chill went down her spine. There was no mistaking the hatred there. He hadn't just lost a battle. He had lost face, and she was the cause. The marriage, intended to secure her safety, had instead made her a target for someone within the tribe itself. Later that night, in the quiet of Blackwood's large tepee, Sarah lay on a bed of furs, exhausted. Blackwood sat cross-legged by the small central fire, sharpening a hunting knife. Dakota was already asleep in a smaller bed of furs nearby. "He watches me," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "Red Dog." Blackwood didn't look up from his knife. "He wanted Dakota dead, and me weakened. You took that from him." "He will try again," Sarah stated, her voice flat. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Blackwood agreed, testing the blade's edge with his thumb. "But he will find a wolf guarding the den now." Sarah looked at him, at the quiet strength in his profile. She was married to a man who was both a leader and a warrior, a strategist and a protector. She was safe, for now. But safety in this land, she was learning, was always temporary. Life in the Crow encampment was a constant education for Sarah. She learned to grind corn, to cure hides, to gather medicinal herbs, and to understand the nuanced language of gestures and glances. The women, initially wary, slowly began to accept her, sharing their knowledge and their laughter. Dakota, full of energy and curiosity, clung to her side, calling her Mother Bird in his native tongue. Blackwood, despite his duties as chief, always made time for her. He taught her to ride a horse without a saddle, to track deer, and to understand the meaning behind the star constellations. He didn't try to change her, but he showed her his world, inviting her to see its beauty and its harsh realities. But the undercurrent of danger remained. Red Dog was a shadow, always present. Sarah would catch his eye across the camp, a cold, unwavering stare that promised retribution. She learned to carry a small knife, to watch her back, and to taste every morsel of food before she ate it. One hot afternoon, several weeks after her arrival, Sarah was helping Grandmother Willow prepare a large pot of stew for the evening meal. The camp well, a communal source of fresh spring water, was a constant hub of activity. Children played nearby, splashing each other, and women drew water for cooking and washing. Suddenly, a group of young boys began to scream. The water is bad," they cried, pointing at the well. Sarah and Grandmother Willow rushed over. The clear spring water was now cloudy, with an oily sheen on the surface. A foul, metallic smell hung in the air. "Poison!" one of the elders shouted. Panic began to spread through the camp. Water was life. Without it, they couldn't survive. Blackwood, alerted by the commotion, arrived, his face grim. He dipped a finger into the water, smelled it, and his eyes hardened. "Wolfsbane," he said, his voice laced with venom. "A slow killer, enough to sicken us all, weaken us for attack. Red Dog." Sarah knew it instantly. The poisoned well wasn't just an act of sabotage, it was a prelude. An external enemy would be blamed, perhaps Rix, but the internal damage would be done. Sickness, chaos, and doubt would spread. "Who would do this?" a warrior shouted, looking around suspiciously. Blackwood raised a hand, silencing them. "Find the source of the spring. See if it has been poisoned higher up the mountain." A group of warriors immediately rode out. Grandmother Willow, her face a mask of worry, began to direct women to boil any remaining safe water and to seek out alternative sources in hidden streams. But the main well was their lifeblood. Sarah, watching the chaos, had an idea. It was a risky one, but she had to try. "Blackwood," she said, pulling at his arm. "I know who did this, and I know how to find the antidote." Blackwood looked at her, his eyes filled with a desperate hope. "How?" "Coulter Rix," Sarah explained quickly. "He and Red Dog planned this. Rix used to have a miner, a man named Jedediah Stone, who dabbled in poisons and tinctures. He worked for Rix, creating poisons for rat control, but he always spoke about more potent uses. Where is this Stone?" "He lives in a shack, deep in the hills, about a day's ride from here," Sarah said. "He's a recluse, but he kept journals, recipes. He might have the antidote for Wolfsbane, or at least tell us what works." "A day's ride is too long," Blackwood said, looking at the children already showing signs of sickness from drinking the morning's water. "And a white man's poisoner cannot be trusted." "He hated Rix," Sarah pleaded. "He thought Rix cheated him. He might help, and I can talk to him. He knew Arthur. He might listen to me." Blackwood hesitated. Trusting a white man, especially one who dabbled in poisons, was dangerous. But the lives of his people were at stake. "I will go," he said. "Take a few men." "No," Sarah said. "Red Dog knows your movements. He will expect you to go after him. He will be watching the paths. If you leave, he will attack the camp while you are gone, weakened and vulnerable. Let me go." Blackwood stared at her, his jaw tight. "You are my wife. I cannot send you into danger. And I am a partner, remember? Sarah reminded him. You stay here. Protect the camp. I will go with 2 warriors. We can travel fast. I know the way. If Jedediah has it, I'll bring it back. Grandmother Willow stepped forward. She speaks with wisdom, my son. Red Dog will expect you. He does not know how strong her spirit is. Let her go. Blackwood looked at his mother, then back at Sarah. He saw the fire in her eyes, the determination he had come to respect. All right, he said, his voice heavy with reluctant permission. Take Swift Runner and Gray Owl. They are the best trackers. If Stone refuses, bring him back here. Alive if possible. If not, bring his journals. Sarah nodded. I'll be back, with the cure. Within the hour, Sarah was mounted on a swift, sure-footed pony, a quiver of arrows on her back, and her Winchester in the scabbard. Swift Runner and Gray Owl, 2 young, silent warriors, rode beside her. As they rode out of the encampment, Sarah looked back. Blackwood stood at the edge of the camp, Dakota beside him, watching her go. His eyes were dark with worry. She pressed her horse onward. The fate of the entire Crow Nation, her new family, rested on her shoulders. She had to find Jedediah Stone, and she had to get back before the poison claimed its first victim. What she didn't know was that Jedediah Stone's shack was not as isolated as she remembered. And Red Dog had already sent his own agents, not just to watch the well, but to watch Jedediah Stone. Sarah was riding straight into a trap. The trail to Jedediah Stone's shack was a treacherous ribbon of mud winding up the Beartooth Ridge. Sarah rode hard, her pony frothing, with Swift Runner and Gray Owl flanking her like silent shadows. They reached the dilapidated shack just as the sun dipped below the peaks. The silence was wrong. There was no smoke from the chimney, only the fresh, muddy boot prints of intruders near the door. Rix's men, Sarah whispered, sliding her Winchester from its scabbard. They beat us here to silence him. They dismounted and crept to the window. Inside, Sarah saw Jedediah Stone tied to a chair, his face bloodied. Standing over him was Silas Pike, Coulter Rix's brutal foreman, along with 2 hired guns. Pike was laughing, a knife in his hand. Sarah didn't wait for a plan. She smashed the butt of her rifle through the glass and fired. The shot shattered the lamp, plunging the room into chaos. Swift Runner and Gray Owl burst through the door, tomahawks flashing in the dim light. The fight was brief and violent. Sarah kept her aim steady on Pike, who froze as he reached for his fallen pistol. Give me a reason, Silas, Sarah warned, her voice cold. Swift Runner bound Pike's hands while Sarah cut Stone loose. The antidote, she demanded. The trembling old man handed her a vial of thick green liquid and a pouch of charcoal. Mix it with water, he rasped. It'll stop the heart from slowing. We ride, Sarah ordered, hauling Pike to his feet. He is the proof we need. They tore back down the mountain, risking their necks in the dark, knowing every second wasted was a life lost. When they burst into the encampment, the atmosphere was at a breaking point. A massive fire burned in the center, and Red Dog was standing before the council, inciting a mutiny. The spirits punish us, Red Dog bellowed, pointing at Blackwood. He brought the White Witch, and now our water turns to poison. He is weak. Blackwood stood his ground, his hand on his knife, but the terrified tribe was wavering. Red Dog drew his blade, sensing his moment to strike. Lies! Sarah screamed, galloping into the firelight. She leaped from her horse, dragging the battered Silas Pike behind her. There is no witch here, Red Dog. Only a traitor. She tossed the antidote to Grandmother Willow. Mix this, now." Then she shoved Pike toward the council fire. "Tell them, Silas, or I let the tribe have you." Terrified by the wall of angry warriors, Pike broke. It was him, Red Dog. He met with Rix at the canyon. He told us when to poison the well so he could take over. The tribe's fear turned to instant, cold fury. Exposed and cornered, Red Dog snarled. With a desperate scream, he didn't attack Blackwood. He lunged straight for Sarah, his knife flashing. "No!" Blackwood roared. But Sarah didn't flinch. She raised her Winchester from the hip and fired. The bullet caught Red Dog in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the dust. Blackwood was on him instantly, his spear tip pressed against Red Dog's throat. The camp fell silent. "Death is too easy for you," Blackwood hissed, his voice shaking with rage. "You are banished. You are a ghost. If the sun rises and you are found on Crowland, you die." Red Dog, clutching his bleeding shoulder, scrambled to his feet. He looked at his people, seeing only disgust. He turned and stumbled into the darkness, a man without a tribe. The sun rose the next morning over a healing camp. The antidote had worked. The fever had broken. Sarah sat by the river, watching the water flow, the adrenaline finally fading into exhaustion. Blackwood sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "They're calling you White Wolf now," he said softly. "The spirit that walks between worlds, the protector." Sarah smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. The divide between their worlds had been bridged by courage and blood. "I didn't do it for a name," she whispered. "I did it for my family." Blackwood kissed her forehead. "And you are home, Sarah. Finally home." What an incredible journey. Sarah Bennett proved that courage knows no color and that a mother's instinct can change the course of history. She went from a lonely widow to the fierce white wolf of the Crow Nation, finding love and purpose in the most unexpected place. Her story reminds us that sometimes the things we fear most are the very things that will save us, and that true family is built on loyalty, not just blood. If this story moved you, please take a moment to hit that like button. It truly helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with friends who love epic historical dramas with strong female leads. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our next powerful story from the Wild West. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next trail.